Hi, everyone. Good morning to today's first keynote of the day. It's great to be here with Chris Bregler. I hope we have you online, Chris, and you can hear us. So today's keynote will be from Chris. It's a live keynote. I'm going to shortly introduce Chris, but before that, I'll just give you a bit of logistics. So for the people in the room, if you have questions, just queue up at the mics. And for the people online, just write up your questions and I'll read them. Chris will give us a 45 minutes talk, and then we can go for the Q&A. So that's pretty much for the logistics. So I'm going to introduce Chris. It's an honor to have him here with us. So thank you so much for joining. Chris Bregler is a director and principal scientist at Google AI. He actually received an Academy Award for the Oscar Science and Technology category for his work in visual effects. His other awards are many, and they include the IEEE Longe-Higgins Prize for fundamental contributions in computer vision that have withstood the test of time, the Olympus Prize, and many grants from the NSF, the Packard Foundation, the Electronic Arts, and so on and so forth. He was formerly a professor at the New York University and Stanford University, and he was named Stanford Joyce Faculty Fellow, Terman Fellow, Sloan Research Fellow. It's an honor to have Chris here with us, and we do thank him also for supporting the challenge yesterday that you probably attended, the Cheap Fakes Challenge. And today, Chris will actually discuss further his work on synthetic media, new opportunities, and new challenges. So thank you so much, Chris, for joining, and I'll hand it over to you. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Andra. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear.
Great. And now let's see if this, oops, 1 second. Can you see my screen? 1 second.
Yes.
I'm sharing my slides right now. Okay, so thank you. I'm honored to give a talk in Istanbul, and unfortunately, I'm still in San Francisco. It's 11 p.m. at night right now. So, and what I will be talking about are sort of the two flip sides of synthetic media. All the new opportunities that we observe over the last few years, or actually the last 30 years. And then also about the new challenges. And as you've heard, there was a challenge yesterday, a cheap fake challenge, out of context challenge, that is a very prevalent source of misinformation. But I also talk about all kinds of other challenges that are all over in society right now that we're dealing with, that sort of rise out of this new technology, synthetic media techniques. So, okay, so let's start like 30 years ago or 25 years ago. And I want to define a little bit what synthetic media is in a moment. But first of all, when I got started, I was a PhD student at UC Berkeley, and there was this movie Forrest Gump coming out. And there was this one scene in there where John F. Kennedy, the former president of the US, was talking to Forrest Gump. And it was completely seamless, photorealistic. And I was fascinated about it. And I'm going to go back to that in a minute. But this was a visual effects shot that was done by Industrial Light and Magic, which is the visual effects unit from Lucasfilm. And then I joined in the mid to late 90s a company in Silicon Valley called Interval Research. And we built a system that can show with machine learning and computer vision and speech recognition. There was a very, very small neural network in there. So it was not a deep network, but it was already some early version of some machine learning technique. how to build a system that can automatically lip sync an actor or actress from stock footage. So, and then, but it didn't work on 4K full resolution feature films. But my colleague, JP Lewis, who actually worked on Forrest Gump at ILM, and I worked with him at Interval, joined Disney, and they had a script called Gemini Man. And there was this dream in the late 90s. Some people call it the Turing test of visual effects. So that means you can create images or videos of a natural scene or a human face, and you cannot tell the difference anymore if it's real or fake. And one of the first milestones was to show that in the visual effects industry. It was a huge team I joined back then, and we released our first test in 2002. Gemini Man was a movie that was released a few months before the pandemic started, like end of 2019. You might have seen it in the theaters. There's several other movies afterwards, but it was sort of a milestone movie. But it started already 20 years before with the first test in a movie studio. And it started with the traditional pipeline. You scan in 3D head with full resolution. This is in-house actor Price. He was also an executive at Disney. And then we built computer vision techniques, machine learning techniques, geometric techniques, rendering techniques, and so on to sort of photorealistic reanimate that person as a younger version of themselves. And back then, we called it visual servo, but you can call it now differential renderer. If you're in computer graphics and SIGGRAPH, and that was sort of over the last few years, sort of a new technique that came out. And so we could track with very high accuracy and with much detail the 3D shape from a single view, but we also had multiple views here. And then the first milestone was to recreate that face in 2002. And if you sort of not look like down into the subpixel level and all the shades that are incorrect here, because like there's some inconsistency in the face, but if you look at sort of more from a distance, you could claim we passed the first time the visual Turing test or the Gemini test if you recreate the same person. So on one side, it's the computer graphics face. On the other side, it's the original video recording. But then we also had to like create a younger version. And so back then, rendering was not that much evolved. The face was a little plasticky. In this test, he didn't have hair. There was something slightly off with the eye. And so it didn't pass yet the Turing test back then. And the film was like put on hold. We all moved on. Some of us went back to Industrial Light and Magic. And then the movie, Disney sort of shopped it around again and asked Industrial Light and Magic if they could do it. And so we were already like taking some of the inspiration and actually some of the concrete techniques from them and sort of productized it inside Industrial Light and Magic, or these are all my colleagues here, where we use computer vision and machine learning techniques, but also have a very large visual effects artist pipeline. And we could capture faces from movies and full bodies. And some of those techniques that we developed, I left around 2015, but it made it into some digital double projects later on at Star Wars that you see here. And so this is Tarkin, a character, but this character is a little uncanny. So it's okay to be in the uncanny valley. This is sort of like if you don't get everything 100% correct, there's still sort of 1% is sort of off, but that sort of fits to the character. So in a way, this was another milestone, but for the selected actor back then, if you don't remember, if you might have seen Midnight Cowboy with John Voight. John Voight then, there's the old version of John Voight, the young version. There was a little bit of a mismatch. The technology was not there yet. And then many of us moved on again. I went to Google, JP Lewis and others went to Weta Digital in New Zealand. And then in 2019, actually another milestone there that was not done by us, but if you're a fan of the Furious sequence, like this is Furious 7, where one of the main actors, Paul Walker, unfortunately died. But this was the first time a digital double was recreated from stock footage. And it was not uncanny. It was actually, and it's debatable. Some people who are very, very critical said it's still not there. And then Gemini Man in 2019 with Will Smith, people also like, I think it's there. It's still not there. Like, it's sort of like, I think that was a valid milestone. And there are like more and more movies coming out where a human face is completely in 4K resolution recreated. That passes the Turing test. And what's behind that, as you know, like at Industrial Light and Magic and many other movie studios, when you do full body capture, but also face capture and want to recreate it, it's not just like one video and it's just shot without any instrumentation. Usually there is like some specific motion capture or performance capture suit there. This is the version that we used at Industrial Light and Magic for doing natural lighting and so on. Paul DeBevec, he was actually my office mate at Berkeley when we sort of had the similar dreams back then. He built like several versions of a light stage. It's a big stage where you light on the skin with lots of different ways. And then you can render that face in any kind of possible appearance. And then also, like, besides all these huge stages and suits and everything, it's usually a big army of visual effects artists that tweak every single frame of a shot. And so it's still not fully democratized. It's not a product. It's like very expensive and only a few studios can do it. But meanwhile, actually, over 30 years ago, you remember that maybe, Photoshop was released in 1990. And fun fact, the people behind Photoshop, John Knoll and his brother Thomas Knoll wrote most of Photoshop, but John Knoll was already at Industrial Light and Magic. He was running the visual effects unit there. He was running the unit where I and all my colleagues were working on. And so that tool now gave into the hands of every person media manipulation techniques that are photorealistic and have a certain quality. And then over the last few years, all this could be packaged up into phones and smartphones and consumer products. So now I want to switch gears a little bit. Some of us moved to Google. I joined there 5 years ago. We started in virtual reality, but there's also a great computational photography team. Here you see Mark Levoy, and then also Yael Preach and many others are running that, and we're collaborating with that. And we had a lot of internal projects where sort of this capture techniques based on computer vision and machine learning, now it's deep learning, can be minimized and can be optimized to run on a phone. And then also you can run on a phone like now high resolution matting, as you know. And a few years ago, this was in 2017 when Pixel 2 got launched by Google. One of the milestones was an AI-powered computational photography feature that can simulate depth of field. Like you can blur the background with high quality. And it sort of looks like the real image is like everything is sharp, but sort of you want to enhance it and blurring the background, it's all on your phone without a 3D camera or without an expensive lens. And many other things. And you can call this synthetic media, you can call this manipulated media. Just last year, just recently, also things that I just showed you earlier, Paul Debevic's light stage that can sort of relight a face is now in your pocket. It was a SIGGRAPH paper together between Google's unit Daydream and Google Research and UC San Diego. And then it was productized, and it's a feature now in Pixel 5. Same things, HDR, high dynamic range, or sky palette transfer, where you sort of can, with a UX component on your phone, you can change the image photorealistically and sort of make it look more airy or afterglow or stormy, and it still looks like a real picture. This is sort of great synthetic media as a tool for your artistic and creative outlets. Then also something very interesting, just recently a launch, and this is not everything is launched on Pixel. Things we have other platforms like Photos. You might have used Photos at Google, and there are ways that you can do matting, and then you can sort of have 3D effects, relive certain memories that sort of look 3D. And this might, if you're using Photos, this might pop up sometimes with your photos and reanimates it like this. And then there's also prototype work, more academic work. Next week at ICCV, for example, Infinite Nature comes out from people like Anjo Kanazava and Noah Snavely's team, where you train a deep learning technique on thousands of YouTube videos of drone footage, and then you just can render infinite sequences photorealistically, and there are lots of potential applications. So at Google, like at many other technology companies, some of the groups are run like a university, but then it sort of transits into products. And also on the other side, capture technology, what you saw with like this face capture and with like motion capture suits and lots of cameras, many platforms and many other cell phone vendors and startups are also managed right now in real time to put face capture and full body capture on the phone. And at Google, we also launched things with Daydream and with other teams in research, where you can then do synthetic media, if you want to call it, like you add glasses. And this is just a few years ago when it got launched, 2019, but there are many, many new features coming out. And then hot off the press just a month ago, and there's audio coming up, right? Oh yeah, it will go through my loudspeaker and microphone. There's a prototype. This is not a product, but at CVPR this year, team in research, multiple groups came up with how to use this capture technique. And then you can see it like you can do lip sync, you can change the lips photorealistically, you can use voice cloning techniques, you can use Google Translate, and you could go from one language into another language with all these techniques. And let's see if this works. This is going from English to Spanish.
Hi, and welcome back to Machine Learning Foundations for Google Developers.
Bienvenidos a Fundamentos de Aprendizaje Automático. Soy Lorenz Moroni y seré su anfitrión y guía. Ya dimos los primeros pasos en visión artificial y construimos una red neuronal que reconocía prendas de vestir. Entonces, antes de comenzar, demos un vistazo a la respuesta del ejercicio anterior.
So I don't know how many Spanish speakers were in the audience and how much you think this passed the Turing test or the Gemini test. But it is in the prototype stage. We're public about it. We're publishing about it. And of course, Google is not the only place who does it. There's a strong academic community, lots of other companies who do this. This slide here about lip sync or resynthesis of facial expressions is not exhaustive, just a few examples. Like we started in the 90s with Video Rewrite and John F. Kennedy. People like lip syncing presidents, and so University of Washington did a few years ago, Obama lip-syncing at SIGGRAPH, and then Justus Thies and others at University of Munich and Stanford came out with face-to-face. You might have heard about it, where you capture a face without a depth camera and then you reanimate another face. And there are many, many techniques now how to do this with much less data. And startups like Synthesia in London is one of the leading companies. There are like just this year, several new technologies popped up, like MyHeritage with like how you can reanimate a few months ago your stock footage video. And just like 2 days ago, a new kind of reanimation of faces got released by the same company. And you also might have seen that surprise keynote by the CEO of NVIDIA. I think it was last month, that was full synthetic media. So this is all exciting. Most of this is used for education, for increasing accessibility, for low bandwidth video communication, for artistic, for comedy, for many other things. But then, as you know, and this is now, I'm sort of switching gears to the flip side of synthetic media. All of you might have heard of deep fakes. Deep fakes is this term that was created actually late 2017 by a Reddit user, an anonymous Reddit user. That user got banned right away because the user used adult videos and without consent, was face swapping with that neural network technique, faces into very controversial videos, violating policies and so on. But as an outcome, also in December 2017, the first public code was published in GitHub of deepfakes. And deepfakes is basically, here you see Amy Adams swapped into Nicolas Cage, fully photorealistic, and you can do that frame by frame. And that sort of was not possible before to the general public. It usually was done in university labs, and a graduate student was owning the code, and only that graduate student could run it. But now it's open source, and they also like released Fake App in 2018, and every few weeks and every few days new code comes out. It's a very collegial open source community. And also deepfakes originally was just taking a face and swapping it out in another video or picture, but now deepfakes is everything. Sometimes you see in the press, even deepfakes is applied to something that has no deep network applied to it. And also voice is a deepfake, there are text deepfakes. So the definition of deepfakes has been much, much broader over the last few years. So, sorry. Okay, so of course, what happened in 2018 now is the public and also reporters and many other stakeholders were concerned, were alarmed. What's happening with this new technique? It could like be dangerous for society. You can misuse it. And this is our valid concerns. And I will talk in a few minutes what Google has been doing, what the general public is doing, what all the platforms are doing about it. And also what we sort of observe and what sort of like my thoughts and our thoughts are about what are the real threats. Deepfakes is still popular, but as I said earlier, as soon as the photograph or the camera was invented, as soon as human media was invented, manipulated media existed. Like here's one photo of Abraham Lincoln, and they didn't replace the face like in deepfakes, but they replaced the hair. You might know Joseph Stalin was rewriting history with a secret government lab of like touching up photos and removing them. And then since the last 30 years, reporters and anybody who's not technically sophisticated can Photoshop. This is a down here LA Times photo in Iraq of a British soldier, and it was actually a composite of two. And those missiles was also an event from many years ago. So, and you can stretch it even further. The printing press was invented, and you think what you print is true, but it's not always true. And so we at Google, I want to sort of now zoom out, and have sort of a broader picture, put this in the context. We have many, many initiatives how to deal with manipulated media, and we call it also media integrity. Many platforms call it media integrity. And there's a lot of internal work, but I sort of go here through a few examples how we also engage with the public, with academics, with journalists, with fact checkers, and so on. And so the bigger issue is, as I said, as soon as like the camera was invented, you can also and when the camera was democratized and when Photoshop was democratized, everybody can do it, and not just a few experts. And so Google started a few years ago the so-called Google News Initiative with some initial funding, and now it's second round, much more funding, especially during the pandemic around COVID, misinformation, and many others. And it sort of builds on the recognition, as I said, the open web since the 90s empowers everybody to have a printing press. And so it's not clear anymore what is accurate information, what is high quality information, how you even define high quality information, how do you define high quality media, and so on. And this is a study from the Reuters Institute at Oxford, sort of the global trust in media has been going down. There's actually, if you can see it, there's Turkey. It's like 40% trust. The United States is only 38% trust. For some reasons, that's 53 trust sources they use. But this is sort of annual fluctuation and so on, but it's sort of low all over. In Finland, it's much higher. In Korea, it's much lower. So this is an interesting graph by itself. Google is a global company like all other platforms, and there are like three prongs. I'm not going for them right now, but there's like we have several surfaces like YouTube, Google Search, elevate quality journalisms, then work with newsrooms, actually fund new nonprofits. First Draft, you might have heard about it when you work on misinformation and fact checking. They have lots of projects. They got started with the Google News Initiative. They have been very active with deep fakes and cheap fakes, but also in general misinformation and helping out in elections and on multiple platforms. And then also not just newsroom, but also audiences, how to increase digital literacy, how to consume media. And there are also many nonprofits and journalistic organizations that work on this. And some more concrete things. One thing is to enhance authoritative content, especially during great news situation. And a very concrete thing is there is this organization, so-called the International Fact-Checking the International Fact-Checking Network. These are hundreds of nonprofits and newsrooms, and they come in different forms. They're all over Europe, Asia, Africa, South America, North America, and there's sort of like to be a member of this International Fact-Checking. This is not run by Google. This is an independent organization that works with all the platforms, that works with many parties. And but there are sort of new ways, especially when misinformation is increasing, when man-made or natural disasters happen early on. Nobody knows what's going on. So during that time, fact checking needs to be boosted, but also like just sustainable, maintain it over a long time. And like just talking about the technology that powers this, like the alternative frameworks, but Google and YouTube and Bing and Facebook to some extent and Google search is supporting something called claim review. And that's also very interesting. And sort of, if you've been part of the challenge that sort of was awarded yesterday at the conference, you might have heard about claim review before. Fact-checking articles are written in claim review. So if you have a fact check, say this picture was photoshopped, or this picture has a deep fake, or this picture or something else, usually you're an independent fact-checking organization. You have your own format on the web, but there's a meta language, schema.org. It's called claim review that then makes it possible for the platforms to automatically parse it and then feature it if there's a new YouTube video or a new Google search result or new image served, and there's maybe something wrong with it, and we need to show it. And it's not like the platform's opinion, it's the fact checker's opinion. And so there is a fact checking tool API that's run out of our research org. I'm not going into it, but you should check it out if you're interested in it and you want to scrape and collect fact checks, more computational. And so that by itself is sort of like this sort of very broad layer to deal and to mitigate sort of these challenges that we observe now. Now, let's go back to deepfakes. Let's not forget about deepfakes. Deepfakes itself, we right away started several internal efforts. As you know, Google Research had people like Ian Goodfellow, who invented GAN, and Dirk Kingma, who invented variational autoencoders, and many others. There is a red team that works on adversarial techniques, adversarial learning. We're creating lots of data sets. We're collecting data sets, and we're also building so-called detectors. Well, is this a synthetic pixel, or is this a synthetic area, or is the entire image synthetic? Is it a deep fake? Is it a cheap fake? A cheap fake, and one version of cheap fake is photoshopping, and you see here Emma Gonzalez from the Parkland shooting. She was sort of advocating against gun violence and had a target that she ripped up, a gun target. And then somebody photoshopped the US Constitution in it and spread it as misinformation that she's against the Second Amendment. And so then we're partnering with people like Luisa Verdoliva. She's a professor at the University of Naples, who is one of the leading experts to detect those Photoshop slices. And they're like heat maps that say, okay, so the Constitution looks like fake, but the rest of the image looks like real. And I'm not talking too much about our internal efforts, but public efforts. A couple of years ago, one of the first public efforts together with the leading academics. We always think the academics should sort of steer it and sort of lead it, and we can support them. Technical University of Munich and University of Naples, like Professor Matthias Niesner and Professor Luisa Verdoliver and her students and postdocs work with Jigsaw, which is a unit at Google right now that works on misinformation, and also our research team. And we published a large trove of deepfake examples as a training set, and also to support a public benchmark that was run by University of Munich and Naples. It was called the Face Forensics and Face Forensics Plus Plus. For some time, the leading benchmark. There are other benchmarks out there, as you know, the Deepfake Detection Challenge and many other things. So this is like quick facts. Like we also like some of the things that are important in this area is consent. We were the first one who actually recorded actors and actresses and seek consent to deepfake them. Lots of details about deepfake architectures I don't go through, but here were some early examples. One of that person is fake, one of that person is real, fake, fake. And we also were active in audio deepfakes. This is, again, it's led by academics at the annual or the biannual speech conference. It's the ASV Spoof conference. And we donated data, and other companies and other organizations donated data. We also right away did some internal tests. What could we do about it? Let's just dream about, and I'm not saying there's a silver bullet to detect deepfakes, but if we would have a deepfake detector, and we do, but they have false positives and false negatives, if you show a deepfake to a user, and this is not a specific platform, this is very general. So we had Walter Matthau telling jokes, and then we deepfaked Richard Nixon into it. This is led by Jigsaw, and our research team supported it. And then sort of different like ways to tell, well, this video has altered content. Do you really want to watch it? Or so on, and then user studies. And even those studies are like have been done for a while now. Just last month they were published, and here's a link on Medium. And there's some surprising results. Like even if you tell people this is fake, not the majority, but still a pretty high number of people think it's actually real. It's much more complex to deal with this. So it's not just a technical problem. It's a psychological problem. It's very complex, a multifaceted problem to deal with this. Then also something that we see over the years, it's so-called the liar's dividend for deepfakes. Liar's dividend is a term that was coined by Danielle Citron and Bobby Chesney, two lawyers. In many, many elections and all over the world in many other areas, if there's a real video and the person wants to deny that that video really happened, or their supporters want to deny it, or there were like cases where somebody was imprisoned and there was like some speech and people thought that is not authentic, that is like a forced statement, they say this is a deep fake, but it's actually real. So in this case, in Brazil, there was like some compromising video of one of the candidates, and their supporters said it's a deep fake. It was just a few days before the election. And this is another big issue, that just the existence of deep fakes gives a lot of people the argument to say it could be fake. You know, video is not proof anymore. Images are not proof anymore. We know that for like 30 years, but with video now, it's the same thing. And it's really hard to now sort of decide this is true or this is wrong, determine it. And there are like other frameworks that want to get around it. All right. Now, very quickly, cheap fakes, especially Photoshop detectors, we also did sort of a prototype, how to bring this technology directly, not to the end user. We also have lots of thoughts. Should you have actually a detector, an API or a tool to the public, given it has false positives, it has false negatives, there's no silver bullet, nothing works perfectly, but what if you give it to trained journalists and fact checkers? And here is like an entire group of fact checkers has tried it out. This is another project led by Jigsaw and our team. It's called Assembler. And we worked again with a bunch of the leading academics, University of Maryland, Naples, Berkeley. We started with Dartmouth, but moved to Berkeley. And these are not deepfakes. There's one deepfake detector in there, but cheap fakes or Photoshop manipulations are much more prevalent. And so there was a UX, and then you could see what is fake and what is real. And then you can see it's very likely manipulated or not. But it's sort of, it's not open to the public. And we can discuss this in the Q&A, why we don't want to open to the public. There are many reasons, like you could reverse engineer it. You could give your adversaries too much information. It's also with this false positives and this liar dividends. if it triggers at something that's actually not fake, then people could weaponize and say, look, this says it's fake, but it's not. So it's just one out of many signals. But this was an interesting experiment last year. And then before I go, no, this is actually part of the last, the last parts that I want to touch upon is another signal, another framework to figure out if something is fake or real, if something is manipulated or not, is so-called provenance frameworks. And there are lots of different provenance frameworks. There's like industry consortiums right now that want to do cryptographic signing at cameras. If you take a picture and then say, okay, I know this is a real picture, I cryptographically sign it, I propagate this with some crypto frameworks. But there's also other things like Google has image search and reverse image search, and lots of images are out there for many, many years, and they're indexed. And many of the fact checkers actually use this tool in order to figure out, okay, so we have this new picture. We don't know if it's real or not. Let's go to Google or TinEye or Yandex, or there's several reverse image search platforms out there, and try to find if there are other occurrences of that image a few years ago. And did they look slightly different? Were they used in a slightly different context? And so our system, this is Howard Su and Google Research, who runs the research team behind it, is sort of a flexible system. It doesn't have to be exactly the same image to come back. It can be photoshopped a little bit. Here are a few use cases. If you have observed the US, Texas, when there was this big power outage, there was this misinformation that the windmills in Texas are frozen and the helicopters is flying around and defrosting it. But then if you sort of look where this picture comes from, it's actually from 2014 in Sweden. And it was not de-icing Texas wind turbines just a few months ago. Or things like an empty shelf, and you say, this is the product of socialism that just popped up a year ago. But what really happens, this is a picture if cropped out of 2011 after the earthquake and in Tokyo. And there were empty shelves. And so you can use these provenance frameworks to sort of debunk what's going on. In those cases, no pixels were modified. In this case, this was a controversial picture where a famous athlete had something, a political statement on it. You run a reverse image search and see, oh, it's actually, this is the original one. This is just a fun thing. Somebody had fun. This is art. This is not misinformation. But this is a former president who was apparently painting this, but it's sort of, this is like an entire provenance tree. It's coming from a school where he helped out and this and that. And so sort of, you can actually access the API directly and experiment with this. There are like surfaces that access this. And then I want to now dive in the last few minutes on the most prevalent misinformation. And I sort of touched upon this already. It's not pixels are modified. It's just they're misattributed. It's not a sexy topic like deepfakes, where a lot of people put their, because it's well defined, it's cool, it's whatever, but finding out that a picture, automatically finding out a picture was just reused and then a different caption or a different context. This is called misleading or false context, or sometimes called misattribution. It's the most prevalent misinformation threat out there in manipulated media. And so, as I said, we're mainly focusing on deepfakes. There are many deepfake papers, deepfake detection papers. Then there are some papers on cheatfakes. There are almost no papers on how to detect that the context is changed. And that's why the ACM multimedia systems had this challenge that just was announced yesterday, the winner, there is this new task, like here's, for example, ballot stuffing, pictures of ballot stuffing. They claim this was done in the US in 2015, but it's really a picture from Russia in 2012, and so on. And so there are studies out there. Early in the pandemic, there was a lot of COVID misinformation. And again, the Reuters Institute at Oxford did some study on claim review articles, fact-checking articles on COVID, and figured out what are the different types of manipulations in there. No deepfake. A few fabricated and reconfigured. That's sort of like they use a slightly different text, but most of it was false context or misleading context. And so I want to conclude here. There are coming a few papers out. Arguably, the first paper was by Shivanshi Anicca and Matthias Niesner, an out-of-context detection architecture and a data set. And here's the link. And I'm not going into this right now, but it sort of can look, well, I go for 1 minute into it if I have time. But there's like this picture here of Obama and Dr. Fauci in the US visiting a lab. And now you can search the web, and there are like 2 articles about this, or many articles. And one article claims he was visiting a lab in Maryland in 2014 to learn about the Ebola vaccine. And the other one is he was visiting a lab in Wuhan in 2015 to learn about the BAT project. And so there's some very smart techniques right now that Shivanshi came up with of semantically analyzing the captions and also, in a way, semantically analyzing what's in the picture and comparing it. But it's very important. The technique does not determine what is true or false. This is much harder to do. It's just determining those 2 things are there. They're in conflict. Can you please check on this? And maybe in Q&A we can talk about it, why we should not determine the truth, why we should always leave it up to humans and moderators, or can we actually train an AI to determine the truth? What are the downsides of that? And so I just want to conclude. If you've been yesterday, I was not, I'm in a different time zone, but detecting cheap fakes specifically on out of context. The winner was announced in the student competition. Quick picture, this is Ozgu presenting it. Some of you might have been there, or many of you. We're very happy that there is now increased interest in this problem. It's much, much harder. But we need, as a society, to address really the areas of misinformation that are most prevalent and not bark up the tree of like yet another deepfake detection paper, you know? Okay, so this is it. It's sort of funny, as I said before, deepfakes, super popular. It is a threat, but on the other extreme, misleading context, not popular at all for AI researchers to look at, but it's sort of, we see an uptick. But most of the misinformation is actually that. So I hope as a society and as a research community, we can change that and move more over to the other side. Again, as a discussion point, if we detect it's fake media, it doesn't mean it's fake news. It could be parody, it could be entertaining. And determining if it's actually malicious intent with real world harm, which is disinformation, right now, that's still a human task. Maybe you want to try it out and build an AI for that too. I have a few opinions about that. Many people have opinions about it, if AI can do it, or how long it will take until it can do it. There are a few new projects in the horizon. But overall, it's complex. We have this organ called the brain. We have a few sensors, eyes and ears. We have the world. Then 50,000 years ago or much longer, we invented something called language. We were sitting at the fireplace and we figured out a rumor is spreading much faster than the truth. Then we invented the truth machine. We invented a camera. But then right away, we figured out also how to change that. And so there's no silver bullet. Detectors don't work all the time. Even if they work, we're still by accident fooling a lot of people. Our memory is flaky. Our beliefs are very subjective. It's a multidisciplinary effort. It's not just a technical effort, but it's an effort really worth tackling. And we see more and more people deciding to focus their research on it. All right, I want to conclude here with this slide. I guess that's about it. Synthetic media, most of it is actually very good. Lots of societal benefits, but we also need to be responsible with it. So thank you very much.
So thank you so much. Let's thank Chris. I hope you hear the applause from the room. Thank you so much for a brilliant talk. So much insight and, you know, so many topics that I hope researchers here in the room and online joining us can pick up. So I'll move to the Q&A. I'll ask everybody just post your questions online or queue up to the mic in the room here. So I'll start up just by asking, you know, straight up from your last slide. We were just having a question from Ali in the room. It ties in beautifully. He just says, you know, we have a saying in Turkish, trust half of what you see and don't trust anything you hear. So he's asking and I want to actually support that question, what's the best way to persuade someone if something they believe is actually a fake? So do you have any, you did mention this before, but I'll let you, comment on this.
Yeah, am I still on, not muted? You can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Right. So okay, the Turkish saying half, like 50% trust what you see, but don't trust what you hear. You can interpret that in many ways. I'm not going into that like, hey, so text and language and sound might be much harder than images, but even images and video are losing trust. What can we do to convince somebody? So I said it already early in a few slides, education, it needs to start early, you know? As you know, in Iceland and others, they study that like in school, kids are already taught much earlier how to consume media. And in other countries, nothing happens. Everybody just goes into social media and spreads rumors and it's fun and all that. There are techniques, there's like provenance frameworks, there's like sort of, but this is also like, you might like certain journalists, you might like certain news outlets, or you might like certain newspapers, or you might not like them. And so this is sort of like, I personally, of course, trust a certain news outlet more than another, but that's just my personal opinion. So this is a much more complex area. So you could like do this, like, okay, let's have like bulletproof trust. Like I take a picture, there's this great startup like TruePic, and then it knows this is a real picture, I took it. It cryptographically signs it, and then it propagates it. And then if a news outlet shows that picture, it will also show this was verified. This was really in the camera. That might be increasing a little bit the trust, but still you need to change society to really always look for that. Is this really the picture from that photograph? Or there, in certain societies, you want to have citizen journalists. You want to have them stay anonymous. They don't want to be like tracked. Their privacy implications and many other things. Also, you might take a picture from a different angle and it looks slightly different, or maybe it's staged, or so I don't have a silver bullet for Ali on that, but
Yes.
But Chris, let me give you an example. So
yeah,
the picture you showed from Sweden that was used in Texas for defrosting the wind turbine, right? So I mean, that picture is still original, so it might be cryptographically signed and everything, so it's an authentic picture. But now it's really used for something else, right? I mean, the
context change,
yeah.
I mean, it's impossible for someone, I mean, even like with PhDs and all that stuff, be able to figure out that that's actually, not the right context. That's,
right.
I mean, yeah, we did. I mean, we did a good score on Cosmos, but it's still like 80-something%. What about the rest 14% or 12%?
Yeah. So, our only chance is to change society. Our only chance is education. Well, there's technology. We can like invest a lot, and I'm a technologist. But for example, you show this, and then a lot of people see it as like, oh, okay, it's in Texas. And then like an hour later or a few days later, you show the fact check. No, it was from Sweden. But by then, damage is already done, And so, but sort of increasing media literacy.
I don't want to take the whole time, but one another thing is, Chris.
Then I'll take your mic off.
Someone puts a photograph or picture or some news on the social media, and then a couple of hours later, some of his friends or her friends sends the same information back to him or her, and then he says, okay, oh wow, it must be true because it came from someone else. Actually, it was the same fake news circulating all around, and that's really a big problem. Yeah, thank you.
Right.
So yeah, thanks so much. I think this is definitely a hard problem, but I would like to ask one of my own questions and just talk a little bit about accountability. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on the larger discussion between, giants like Google having, access to so much information. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the efforts you're doing to open up the conversation towards, with governments or regulation, or what do you think that could be done in that respect to sort of, because of course you can make responsible the individual, and that's beautiful, and I think people should be aware of what's out there and the dangers of consuming misinformation, but also opening up this conversation and bringing, a bigger actor like the government, and how can they help in this discussion? Yeah. So thank you.
Right. So I'm not a policy person. I'm a researcher. I run a research team. So this is more like a policy question. But even as researchers, we organize workshops. We work with organizations like Witness. That's an organization from New York that it started also in the early 90s during a police violence video. And so Sam Gregory and others are very active of the human rights implications of this. We're supporting them. We're working with them. We're working with Partnership for AI, First Draft, and many other nonprofits and NGOs. We of course, like every platform, works with governments in multiple areas. But again, I don't want to act like a policy person for Google right now. I want to see it more from a research perspective, and there we're looking at a lot of different creative solutions, and sort of in my scope. It's always Google's policy that we want to sort of amplify the community. We want to have the academics leading it and others. and we can help them, instead of the other way around. I know this is maybe not what you're looking for, but this is in this forum.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
This is perfect. No, this is a great answer. So thanks so much. We do have a couple more questions, so I'll take maybe a few more minutes than we have allocated, if that's okay. So yeah, I mean, Tamara actually asks, do you think compared to normal videos, VR 360 degree videos, which are getting popular, will have more vulnerability to deepfakes, for example, due to the distortions on panoramic frames, and at a given time, users will see only a small region of the frame. There can be a higher chance for such manipulation not to be detected. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't see, 360 and full VR is prone to deepfakes in the same way as like 2D pictures. Yes, I see that. Deepfakes becoming much more high resolution. You've seen it in 4K. I'm not aware that there are studies out there that we see much more deepfakes in 360 than in 2D images. But there are things that a lot of people do. If you want to sort of make it hard to see the deepfake, you compress it down to really low quality, or you take a picture of a picture of a picture, and then you put it in a tweet or another media post. And all the camera traces are gone that you usually try to detect. In VR, you cannot do that. So that might be an argument. It might be actually harder to fake it in VR than like on a 128 square pixel photo on some social media post. As higher resolution you go, as more you go into the uncanny valley, and as more like you sort of see little pixels are off, versus if you just see on your phone a little post and it says, oh, looks about right. So that's sort of my answer. But
so yeah, no, thanks. That's great.
Yeah.
Sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
No. Like there are no studies out there, but that's sort of, as higher resolution you are, as easier it is to detect something is wrong. And it's even subconscious, like this so-called uncanny valley that, oh, I don't know what's wrong, but there's something wrong. Right. And if you look at a 4K or a 360 thing, that happens much more often than when you look at a small screen.
Right. So maybe one last question to close the session today. And because, in our community, we do also bridge between multimedia and communication networks. And you talked, at the beginning of your talk, you gave some beautiful examples about, how people can actually use now their powerful devices to create very, nice images and, to create their own movies and be very creative in that sense. So I'm just wondering, okay, the devices are there. We're seeing more and more power, processing power on the end user device. I'm just wondering, do you have any wish list that you would like from, communication providers in terms of, edge computing type of deployments? Do you think we're there? Are you interested in this type of conversation? So what can we do in other applications? We're talking about autonomous driving and so on and so forth. What are your thoughts on that?
I haven't thought too much about it. For example, we are active in LipSync, and also NVIDIA has this video conferencing app where they use a GAN. And I'm not sure if this is deep into the communications area, but there's MPEG-4, there's the next version, there's this, and then already 10 years ago, people came up with let's have a face model and communicate that with a low bandwidth communication, and then we can be in all kinds of markets where you have low bandwidth. I haven't seen it 10 years ago implemented. The standard is there, but the technologies were not there yet. So I think the technologies are slowly evolving now, like seeing at NVIDIA and other things. So of course you want to have high bandwidth all the time, but you cannot get it.
Yeah, right.
Anytime you have a magnitude higher bandwidth, you come up with another scenario where your bandwidth goes down again.
Right.
And so that interplay between new ways of compressing, using synthetic media for compression, and the societal benefits for that is a very interesting topic in that area.
So thank you so much again, a brilliant discussion and so much interesting, content that you gave us and a lot of, food for thought. So hopefully we'll see much more research coming out on these topics. And again, thank you so much for supporting our community, for being so much, in an open conversation with the research community. And we do hope to see you again here. Well, hopefully in person in the following years for a live challenge that you can also support from here. It was great to have you with us. Again, thank you so much for joining at such a late hour. And we do appreciate your time and your interest and your support to the community. So yeah, thank you. We'll close here. We'll thank the speaker again. Thank you so much. So thanks, everyone.